Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to listen to our comments as it relates to the City Council budgeting process. City Council is in the process of reviewing my FY2017 budget, and they're making change to the budget as they see fit, and that's the way the process is supposed to work. Those of us who are here know that this is a long and arduous process, and especially difficult in a year when resources are limited and the needs are extensive. Earlier this week, the members of council proposed changes to their budget, and the deadline for the changes was Monday before the regular council meeting and the public hearing. Now, despite some council members' proposals through the news media this week, the week is coming to an end, and I still have not seen any of the proposals that have been lifted. With the present physical current constraints, it's imperative, it's important that we work together so that we can together move the city forward. I instructed my staff to request council's amendment proposals, and we were advised that they might be released sometime next week. Let me say this. In the interest of transparency, the City Council should release their budget amendments now. They need to do that so that Richmonders can know how the council proposes to spend the money of the taxpayers. The City of Richmond residents need to know what will be cut in order that they might be able to find new money. News media reported that several council members want significant spending increases, and that's the way the process works. We understand that. But there's no mention of where the money would come from, and that is a problem. That's the fundamental issue here today, because we all want schools to have more money, no doubt about that. We just need to be clear about the impact of where the money is shifted from. All of us want that to happen. In fact, year after year, we've devoted millions and millions more dollars to RPS. For the next fiscal year, I propose once again to allocate $11.2 million in new money that the City Council set aside last year for RPS, and to hold them harmless from cuts that other agencies are having to deal with. If we had more money, if I had more money, we'd certainly be willing to give it to them, but the money simply doesn't exist. And to find it, it would require taking that money from other critical services. That's the question when council proposes new spending. Will these amendments allow departments like police, our chief is standing here, and fire, chief is standing here, and finance, the head of the finance department is standing here? Will we be able to address critical basic needs if these monies are diverted from the places where they have been assigned? Will these amendments allow us to provide the services that our residents demand, but have already been reduced? We hear constantly on a daily basis about leaf collection, about street paving, about bulk pickup. These are the services that we must maintain in order that the city can run in an effective way. Will these amendments protect the city's financial integrity? That's a huge piece that has to be addressed. The integrity of the city has got to be protected and cannot be compromised. We've got to build on our financial bond upgrades so that we can achieve AAA status like other world-class communities around the country along the eastern seaboard. And if we are not responsible, that won't happen. I don't know, but I'm hopeful that we can work together, because all the needs of Virginia's capital city need to be addressed. Now, let me say this. I know that this is an election year, and that means that there will be a lot of promises made and that people are under pressure to make promises. But the test of leadership is not making promises. The test of leadership is actually accomplishing your goals in a responsible way. And so while we wait to hear the council amendments, I want to reiterate the fundamental principles that I laid out when I introduced the budget just a few weeks ago. Our starting point is this. We currently have a budget gap. because last year City Council diverted $9 million from basic services. To close the gap, we're freezing hiring, we're limiting discretionary spending, and we're enhancing revenue collections. Agency budgets are being reduced by 12%. Agency budgets are being reduced by 12%, on top of 3% reductions approved last year. That's 15% in total. Schools will not see any budget cuts in 2017. And while other agencies have seen reductions year after year, I've authorized schools to retain budget surpluses, even from previous years. I've also proposed a 25% reduction in discretionary non-departmental spending, as well as proposing higher fees for our residents as they pay for service delivery. None of these decisions are easy. As a matter of fact, these are painful decisions, but they're necessary in order to pay for Council's decision to divert funds away from basic services last year. We've got to understand that funding for basic services and funding for schools is not a matter of either or. It's a determination of how we are able to do both, given the limited resources that we have available. And so to the full school funding issue, we want to say that we are serious about making sure that we provide sustainable funding for schools. And that's why I've put together a multi-year school funding project evaluation team. And this is a team that includes members of City Council. It's a team that includes members of the school board, city staff, the superintendent, community leaders, and stakeholders in the business community. And our goal is to develop a long-term sustainable funding program to bring Richmond Public Schools the money needed for facilities and operations, but to do it in a way that preserves the city's financial integrity. This team is an example of the way we've got to work together to move the city forward. It's unfortunate that we're in the position that we're in, but we've been in this position for many years. It did not happen overnight, and the solution is not going to happen overnight. We've got to be strategic and making sure that we do this thing the right way. And so as mayor, I've had to write budgets with limited local revenue, declining state dollars, and rising needs. In fact, our population has increased 10% over the past decade. The number of city personnel to serve that growing population has declined by 9%. Population up and city workers down. And revenues are roughly the same as they were a decade ago. This is partly because the city has decided to lower the real estate tax rate twice just prior to the recession. That action alone, together with the economic downturn, basically has us operating in 2016 at 2008 financial levels. Even though the city has grown over time, these are the facts. Our dollars are limited, and any new dollars have got to come from somewhere. And so my approach is to live within our means as much as possible, and I propose to fund services using existing resources and by raising some new ones. Now, it's a bad idea to raid our financial reserves because that will threaten our credit rating, and we should reject any proposal to do so. It will also lower our credit rating and make it harder for us to borrow money, more expensive for us to borrow money, and that means it will take longer and cost more money to build new schools and deliver other services that our residents and neighborhoods expect. It's also a bad idea to continue down the path that was taken last year, the path of cutting operations without regard for the consequences. Any additional cuts to basic services will inevitably cripple the city. The people don't want that, and that's why we don't hear anybody calling telling us that they want us not to pick up their leaves, or they don't call and tell us that they want us to cut operations at City Hall, or not to pick up their trash, or not to pick up their bulk trash in their communities. In fact, I hear people saying that they want them picked up sooner, the leaves I'm talking about, and the streets paved faster. But that's only going to get worse if council cuts the budget further. It's time for the public to demand that the council knows where this money is going to come from. And I think that it's important for us to call for transparency in that regard. And so I thank you for coming, and I'm going to ask our CAO, Selena Cuffey-Glenn, to say a few words, and then Lenora Reed, who's in charge of our finances, to say a word as well. Selena?
Good morning, and thank you, Mayor Jones. I do have some observations as it relates to the budget and the budget process. For us, it's about providing services, and that's services to all of us who call Richmond home. And finding solutions together is something we want to do, working in concert with the City Council. As you may know, and the Mayor certainly iterated that in his comments, the Council amendments in 2016 that was approved resulted in a deficit that's climbing to almost $10 million and a reduction in service delivery. We were told that the reason this occurred is because Council didn't have all the information in 2016 when they were preparing the budget. Not all the questions were answered, so there were no indication or implication of their actions. The Mayor instructed us as part of the 2017 preparation of the budget. After the budget was produced and presented to Council on March 4th, we held a series of meetings with all the City Council members. Some meetings went on for 3 hours or so because we wanted to be certain that we provided all the details as it related to the budget development, the implications, what the reductions would do as it relates to service delivery. And I do want to thank the council members that did meet with the staff and that we were able to provide that information. We have heard, as the mayor's indicated, that there are amendments being proposed as it relates to the Richmond public school system, that anywhere from $5 to $11 or $18 million will be proposed as the amendments for additional funding being provided. For us, it's about understanding the impacts that it will have on service delivery. Because when I speak to the chief of police, it's about coverage and being visible in our community. The fire chief, Lenore, it's about staffing. I know there's been a lot of questions and concerns as it relates to our financial reporting, but if we don't have the ability to bring the staff on because of cuts, I don't know if we can meet those obligations and those requirements. So for us, it's about working together. And I think the public certainly needs to recognize and understand those same children that go to school, the families, the teachers, etc. When they go in the morning, they receive city services. When they leave, they receive city services. So it's before the bell rings and after the bell rings. So for us, it's about the entire community. How do we ensure that we have a balanced and systematic approach that will sustain our ability to fund the required services? As the mayor indicated, it's not an either or, it's how do you do both and do it in a responsible way. We do have a fiduciary responsibility as government, and that is not to have deficits or not comply with our policies, and also to protect the integrity of the city. Those are very, very core requirements of all of us. And if those things are jeopardized, there are real consequences for us as a community. So once again, it's about service delivery, but it's for the entire city, including the school district. At this time, I'd like for Lenore Reed to come forward and provide her observations as well.
Good morning. I would like to provide some clarification to the budget process and where we stand today. This is the second year of a biennial budget process. Therefore, the administration made amendments to Council's approved budget for FY17. So in Council's approved budget for the fiscal years 2016 and 2017, Council provided schools with an additional $9 million each year, which was an amendment to the mayor's approved biennial budget. The way I see the situation is this. At the time Council approved the budget, Council felt that the amount of additional funding was adequate to fund the critical needs of schools at the time with the resources that we had available. This $18 million additional funding for Richmond Public Schools was part of Council's amendment to the mayor's approved proposed budget and was taken from vacancy funding to fund positions that some were critical for city services. Any amendments to provide additional funding to Richmond Public Schools would be amendments to Council's own approved budget for FY17, because the mayor's proposed budget did not change council's approved budget as it related to Richmond Public Schools. But I agree with both the city and schools. Both need additional funding. The need is not in question. What is in question, the situation that we have, is that the needs for the city and schools far outweigh the revenues to support them. That being said, what you see in the mayor's proposed budget for 17 is $9 million additional revenue and expenditures from what was approved by council. And this is to cover the $9 million that was taken away. And how do we get that? Because previously vacancy funding and other savings was used to cover the expenditures that were not itemized in the budget. And so you may look at the budget and some may say, well, I see additional funding. You see additional revenue and expenditures to cover that $9 million. And the way we got that revenue and expenditures was to increase those fees, was to reduce those expenditures from other departments and agencies. I think the mayor mentioned that, to reduce 25% in some instances and 12% across the board for the departments. And what effect is that having on the city? Currently, the city is trying to dig itself out of a hole, out of that projected deficit, in part due to council's amendments for FY16. And the outcome remains unknown. We can't say with all of the efforts that we're putting forth that we're going to dig ourselves completely out of that hole. And so we'll have to see what happens at June 30th. So we're dealing with the financial system right now in finance for the city that cripples the city in its ability to timely prepare financial statements. And this is due to poor and incomplete implementation of the system. It's not the product, it's the implementation of that product. We're dealing with manual workaround procedures that creates delays in providing information, and we're dealing with staffing shortages that compounds the problem tenfold. So budget amendments that decrease the amount of vacancy funding, at least for the finance department and probably citywide, will have a detrimental effect on the department, at least of finance. Due to limited staffing, any decreases in vacancy funding allocated for the Department of Finance will render the department ineffective in its ability to collect budgeted amounts of revenue. It also renders the department ineffective to prepare financial statements in a timely manner, dealing with the shortages of staff, dealing with the decreased funding, dealing with the financial system itself. Budget amendments that decrease the amount of funding allocated for the temporary services will have a detrimental effect on the city. To deal with the shortages in staffing, the city is moving toward temporary employees. With that, there's not enough funding in the budget to cover that as well. So any cuts in that area will render the city ineffective in its ability to prepare financial statements and to operate, to provide customer service to the citizens, to collect the revenue. Budget amendments that decrease the amount of funding allocated for professional services will have a detrimental effect on the department, will have a negative impact on the city's bond rating. We use those professional services contracts for financial services, for financial advisory services, for bond counsel, for auditing and advisory service cost overruns, to contract with agencies to prepare other financial reports that are due for the city, like the cost allocation plan and such. Budget amendments that decrease the amount of funding allocated for operating overall will also have a negative effect in our ability to pay our vendors. And we do not want that. It would increase the issue that we're having when we're seeking to be in compliance with the Prompt Pay Act. So therefore, further cuts to personnel in my portfolio for DIT, we will have an inability to support the city's portfolio of 377 applications and 600 servers. Current levels of staffing there are 80% without any additional funding to cover any vacancies. We have a lack of durability and support of our systems, lack of flexibility in scheduling and work assignments. There is no money set aside in the proposed budget for replacement, upgrade, expansion, and even repair of what the city already has in place. We are very concerned at a possibility that the city's data shortage could run out. When storage runs out, the system ceases to operate. The city overall cannot afford any decreases to the budget. I think the budget is sustainable, and that's one of the things we have to worry about when you prepare a budget. The budgets have to be accountable to both the citizens and to the employees, and it has to be sustainable. And what you have before you is a sustainable budget. It's a tight budget, but it's sustainable. So any cuts, it's my fear that it will render us crippled to be able to move forward in a manner that's best practices for the city of Richmond.
All right, thank you, Lenora and Selena. So at this time, any questions from the press? We'll take them now. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a team that's going to have a multi-year sustainable source of funding schools outside of real estate taxes. Do you have any idea at this point what you could be looking at or what you would look at as far as a funding source outside of real estate taxes?
Yeah, we've mentioned that we are willing to look at all future economic development and dedicate a portion of the proceeds of that economic development for Richmond Public Schools, which would mean that Richmond Public Schools would have a dependable, identifiable income stream that they could look at year after year and know what's coming in. With the development that we have coming to the city, that could be millions and millions of dollars that would allow us to pay down our debt, so it would increase our ability to borrow our bond rating debt. So I think that they're going to be looking at that. They're also going to be looking at the possibility of a referendum. I mentioned in my remarks that the city, not we, but the city, before I became mayor, reduced the real estate tax 2 times, right in the midst of the recession or just before the recession. And that means that the reduction in real estate taxes took place and then the recession hit us. And so we're operating on 2008 revenue in 2016. And so the citizens need to look at the possibility of, do you want to raise taxes? And I think that that should be a referendum. I don't know if I'll get support for that, but that's what I think. I don't think that that kind of a decision should be made in the closed quarters of the mayor's office or the council chambers. I think that everybody should have a chance to weigh in on that. There are other sources of revenue that we could take a look at, such as meals taxes, admission taxes. There are many ways that we can raise money, but you can't do it in a flash. It cannot be done instantaneously. It has to be looked at strategically and comprehensively so that we know that what we're doing will work.
Mayor, have you reached out to any of these council members who are proposing some of these amendments to provide more funding for schools and talked to them about their plans?
We have asked for the amendments, but we've been told that they will be available to us sometime next week.
But have
And
you personally reached out to any of them?
the whole idea is that we want the public to know what the amendments are so that we can interpret the impact of these amendments. Anybody else?
Mayor, the governor, or sorry, Ms. Reed actually just painted a really bleak picture for Richmond. I mean, it sounds like we're on a sinking ship and everyone needs to evacuate.
No,
It was a very
is-
bleak picture.
It's a very important thing for us to say that it is not bleak if we are responsible. If we are responsible, we can make it. If we are at a position where we have got to watch our budget, we have got to watch our pennies, like a family that finds themselves in a situation where their income is meeting the point of their revenue, they have to have a little family meeting and say, we have to kind of watch ourselves and watch our pennies. Maybe we can't go to the movies. Maybe we can't go out to eat. We got to do some things to make sure that we stay afloat. And that's all we're saying here. The picture is a picture that says that we cannot be irresponsible in cutting. That's when it gets bleak. It will be bleak if we irresponsibly cut the budget to the point where we can't provide services.
So where do we go from here? What's next?
What we go from here is we sit down in a reasonable, measured way, and we look at ways to strategically and comprehensively find ways to fund schools. We can make it with what we have. But if it starts getting cut in different places, that's what all we want is transparency. We just want to know what's being proposed so we can know what the effect will be. But we go from here strategically, comprehensively looking at ways as income increases, or do we increase taxes? But we think about it. We analyze it. We have our financial advisors who are sitting at the table with us. We have stakeholders, business people who are sitting at the table with us, and they're looking at it from every angle. And as you look at it from every angle, you get the opportunity to determine How can we get there? We're not going to get there in a year. It's going to take a minute. It took us a minute to get where we are. It's going to take a little bit of time. But I believe that if schools has the understanding that there will be a sustainable stream of income, then they can do their business. They can plan their projected new buildings and so forth, and we can move on. Joe?
Yes, sir. Just wondered if you know, what sort of your response is to the school board's proposal that they could close some schools and consolidate others if they don't get the funding that they are seeking?
Well, I mean, I think that the whole idea of right sizing is not precipitated in any major way. Well, the whole idea of right sizing is something that is a discussion that has been happening for a long time. The estimate is that there are 9,000 empty seats in the school system. And so if there are empty seats in the school system and they need all more money, then right sizing should be a discussion that should be taking place. And not necessarily simply because they're not getting the more money that they want. And I think that all of us, right sizing is a hard thing to deal with, very difficult. And it's something that the entire city will have to be involved in to make sure that the right decisions are being made.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? We really appreciate you coming. Thank you so much.